Hello makers, and welcome to Share Stitchery. I'm Catherine Harris, and this week I wanted to do a sew along as well as a pattern review of the Camden dress and skirt by Nina Lee. First we'll start off with the sew along, and stay tuned because right after that I'll get into the pros and cons of what I liked and didn't like about the pattern. So let's get to it.
Bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum.
So first we're going to start with the pinafore bodice. So we're going to stay stitch the neck edges, and then we are going to place them right sides together and stitch down the center and press that seam open as it's shown here. And now we've got the front piece. Now we're going to do the front side pieces of the bodice. And so with this, because it is a curve, we want to make sure we're matching up the notches. And I like to place a pin in that right away. And then you are just going to pin it along that curve, going down the princess seam here. Now, if you wanted to make any adjustments in your muslin, this is where you can do it because princess seams are really nice to be able to make those modifications. Then we're just going to stitch down the side on the right and left side, and this is what it will look like. You can see it looks almost like there's some gathering going on, and in order to really set ease, we're going to create some snips along that curve, and it just gives an like a fresh of breath air so that you can create that ease and not create those gathering and ruching. So next we are going to press these seams flat. So I like to use my tailor's ham to do that. You could use a rolled up towel if you don't have a tailor's ham as well. And we are going to press this. If you have a delicate fabric, please use a pressing cloth. When I do these videos, I don't use a pressing cloth so that you can see what I'm doing with the seams. And this fabric, which happens to be from Miverva, is a faux suede. It actually presses very nicely and is great to work with, as well as being super soft. And once that is done, we're going to move on to the backs. We've got two back pieces here, and we are going to attach the side back pieces, which is also cut on the princess seam. So matching up the double notches, going along the curves. Now this one's a bit more tricky because you've got one convex curve and one concave curve. So you are going to be really manipulating that fabric to get it in. Use as many pins as you see fit so that you don't get any wrinkles in there. And then we are going to stitch that the same as we did the front and clip those curves and press them open, and it just makes a world of a difference when you clip that in. Next, we're going to do the exact same thing to our lining pieces for the front as well as for the back pieces. And this is when we're all going to put it together. So now we've got our front and our back pieces, and we're going to match them up at the shoulder seams with right sides together. And we are going to pin it in place and stitch that shoulder seam. And we're just going to use our regular seam allowance that we have in the pattern here. And then we're going to press that open. And it's really starting to look like a bodice now. Here's where our lining comes into play. So now we are going to match up the shoulder seams as well as the point in the V-neck, because those are the two most important areas that we want it to line up. So I place those pins first, and then I'm going to pin all the way along, making sure to go from the front to the back. And then I am going to mark where our stitches go because we're going to have a back zip and we don't want the lining to get caught in that. So we are going to mark 3 inches from the edge, and that is where our stitching is going to start and stop because we need to have that leeway for putting in that invisible zip. So let's pop on over to the machine and get the perimeter of this stitched up. And it should look like this. Now we do also have some curves as well. So we are going to take our scissors and we're going to snip specifically in that point to really give it that movement so we can get a nice crisp press when we press it. The next thing we're going to do is understitching. So you're going to fold the seam allowances towards the lining, and then you're going to stitch through those layers. So you don't see it on the right side of the fabric, but you will see it on the lining side of the fabric. This is an incredibly important step in ensuring that your garment lays nicely when worn. So please don't skip that. Next, we are going to match up our shoulder seams, and we are going to sew where the armholes are. And so we're just going to pin along that, matching the right sides together with the lining and our main garment fabric. Once again, stitching for the exact same thing on the other side. And now here it is quite a significant curve, so we're going to add some notches just to create some more movement within that fabric for when we go and press it. So the next thing we're going to do once we've clipped those curves is we are going to want to turn it right side out. So make sure you clip on both sides, and then I'm just going to reach through here, and it can be a little tight, but it should work. And I'm just grabbing the other side of the fabric here, and I'm just pulling it through and just working it a little bit, and it comes through quite nicely. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we want to press this because it'll give a nice crisp edge. Never skip the pressing when you are sewing. It makes such a huge difference on what your final garment looks like. I use a decent amount of steam for that. And this is what our bodice looks like so far. So we don't have the side seams done. So that is our next step. So what we're going to do is we're going to place right sides together with the fronts and the backs of both the lining and the bodice. And then the first thing you're going to match up is that seam that is between the lining and your main fashion fabric. Then you're just going to pin along that seam going down and stitch that with your regular seam allowance. And it should look like this. I also gave it a little press because I want those seams to be pressed open. Now we can move on to the skirt. And so we have the waistband. Now in this version, because it is the Pinafore dress version, I am attaching this to the bodice. If you were making just the skirt, the waistband would be done slightly differently. And if you like, I can do an updated video with just the skirt so that you know how to attach that waistband, but it is rather similar to this. So I'm just matching up my notches on my waistband with the seams that we have sewn. And so once I have that all pinned in place, I'm going to pop over to my machine and stitch along there. So that's what that looks like. And then I've done the exact same thing to the lining waistband side as well. Now we are going to move on to the darts in the skirt. Now, if you've seen any of my videos, you're very familiar with this technique in doing the darts. I like to put a pin through both layers, and then I like to check when I put the pin through that it is going through on the exact same side as the line that I drew, because then I know when I'm stitching my dart that it is going to be exactly where it needs to be. And once those darts are stitched in place, you want to press them, and you're going to press them towards the center back. Now we're going to move on to the pockets. So I've stay stitched the edges of the pockets on the curved edge where the opening will be. And then I am going to stitch along the sides here, leaving a small opening on either end. So I'm just going to pin this in place first across all of the edges so that nothing shifts or moves around. My lining is something from my stash, and I am just going to stitch those edges so you can see that that is all stitched. Now we've got some bulk here, so we're going to cut out a little triangle piece on either end of the corners, as well as clipping some notches into that curve along the pocket so that it can press nicely and lay flat. So I'm just going to turn it right side, and then we're going to press it. And this is what it looks like once it is fully pressed. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to do 2 rows of stitching on the edge here, just for some nice top stitching. And then on your pattern piece, there are 2 notches on the side of the front of the skirt, which is where you're going to line up your pocket to place it on. Now, if you have some fun printed fabric, this is where you can really get creative with some pattern matching on these patch pockets. You could even do it in a different color. That would look really pretty. So I'm just pinning it in place because we are going to go to the machine and we're going to top stitch this in place. And so we're just going to top stitch along the side and the curve, going up along here, and then I'm doing a second row. So you can see I've got 2 rows going in there, similar to what you would see on like jeans top stitching. Now, I don't think this pocket is big enough, but we will see once it is fully made. So once we've got both pockets done, we are going to place them right sides together with the skirt front, and we're going to sew the center seam on the skirt front. So I'm just pinning all the way down, and then we're going to take that to the machine, stitch it, and press the seam open. Now the next step is going to be joining the skirt back, and we're just going to match it up at the side seam. Super simple. They have notches on here, but really this seam is so simple you probably don't even need the notches. And we're going to do the same to the right and the left side here. And then we're going to press those seams open and do the same thing for the lining, but with the lining, instead of a dart, make sure you do a pleat so that it gives a little extra ease when you're moving, because a dart isn't strong enough in a lining piece. You want to have a little extra ease, which a pleat will allow for. So now that we have the skirt all constructed, we are going to take that waistband piece and we're going to draw where the princess seams are down through the waistband. That's where I drew my notches. They're also on the pattern piece, but I left them out because I wanted to really match it up based on where I had actually sewn it. And then we're going to match those same princess seams on the skirt that will match up on the waistband to make sure that everything lines up very nicely. So once we have it pinned in place, we are going to go and stitch that all the way across here. And this is what that will look like once it is all stitched in place, and you can see that it is nicely fitting. Now on to the back zipper. So it calls for an invisible zipper. A couple of prep steps. You want to iron it. You can see mine is kind of sitting like a V. I went to the iron and I pressed it to make sure that it is a bit more open. It'll just make things a lot easier. Now I am measuring the seam allowance down from the top because that's where I want the top of my zipper to end. So I'm just looking at where that ends. I'm matching it up and pinning it in place. And then I'm pinning it face down with the tape of the zipper facing the raw edges, and then I'm going to use my invisible zipper foot and stitch all the way down, attaching that one side. So when it's done, it'll look something like this. And it's important to zip it back up because what you're going to do here is you're going to mark where the waistband is, as well as the top where I had it starting. Because when we unzip it, you want to have those markings on the other side, because the first place that we're going to match up is not the top or the bottom of where the zipper is going to end. We are actually going to match up where those markings are along the waistband, because that is going to be the most noticeable area if you have it offset. You want them to match up perfectly so it looks seamless. So I'm just measuring how far out the seam allowance is, because all zipper tape is different widths, so you don't want to match it up to the edge of your zipper tape. You want to match it up to where your seam allowance is. So I'm just measuring the edge of that zipper tape to where the seam allowance is and then pinning those markings in place. Next, it can go down as far as it needs to go down, and just make sure that the top is also matched up correctly. And when you zip it up, it should look like this with very nice matching going on. And then when we stitch the lining in place, it'll completely cover the top. You won't even need to put a hook and eye in. And now we need to sew the rest of that back seam. So it does have a notch here, and that notch is also important because you are going to want to stitch from that notch up towards the zipper. So make sure you're pinning on the right side of the fabric to allow you to stitch up towards the zipper. So we're going to stitch up this way and just stitch right beside the zipper. So I actually switched to a zipper foot at that notch point, and I'm going to back stitch just for an added security. And then I am going to stitch as close as I can get to that zipper foot and back stitch. And I'm just overlapping just slightly to where those stitching lines end. So you can see where mine end and where the zipper ends. It's probably maybe 0.5 centimeter. Now for the finishing touches. So on the lining here, I am just measuring out how much I need to reduce on my lining piece because I am not going to hem my lining. I am actually just going to serge the edges. Now you can roll it up and hem it, but I thought that this was fine enough. So I cut off those edges, and I'm actually using my serger to cut it off as opposed to using the scissors. 2 steps in one. And now we are going to attach the skirt lining piece to the skirt bodice lining. And so we're just going to attach it the very same way that we attached the skirt main fabric, where we're matching up those princess seams and the ends, and just stitching that in place, and noting that we do have an opening going down to where that notch is in the back of the skirt, because that's what we're going to hand stitch in along the zipper, which is what I'm showing you here. I've just folded it in the amount of our seam allowance, and then I am going to be hand stitching all the way down to where that notch is. So it's actually below where the zipper ended, because if you recall, that notch was below the zipper. And here I am just measuring for my hem on the skirt. So you can see that I've folded under the seam allowance amount, and then I've folded up 1.5 inches. And then I will do my hem at about, I don't know, 1.25 inches, where I'm going to stitch that, or you can stitch it right along the top of that. And so this is what it looks like when you've got all the hand stitching done, as well as the hem. So now that we've got all of the garment construction out of the way, let's get into the nitty-gritty about the pros and cons of this pattern and really break it apart. So I wanted to start out with the fact that the instructions and the way in which the garment is constructed is very well made. It has a fully lined bodice as well as a fully lined skirt, and the way things come together is very nice. Some of the things that I would change on this is I understand that the bodice is drafted in a way that creates a little bit of ease under the bust. And in my personal opinion, I'm not sure if I'm entirely sold on that. I think if I made this dress again, I might change the bodice so that it fits a little bit closer. I am also on the fence about a V-neck and the wider straps, shoulder straps, on myself personally for my me-made wardrobe. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Does it suit me, or should I change the bodice a little bit? As for how the skirt is drafted, I am absolutely in love with it. So the skirt fits perfectly. It's got a fantastic, elegant, and classic shape. Now I did the mini version, which is great standing up, but when I do sit down, it rides up just a little bit too much for comfort. So I think that when I make this again, I'll make the skirt version, but I'm going to make it in the size that is between the longer version and the mini version that is included, so that it's still a shorter skirt, but it's a little bit more modest. And one thing that I disliked, and in this pattern that will be a pattern piece that I will probably chuck out, is the pockets. They are incredibly cute and I love a good patch pocket, but they are not that functional unless you plan on keeping, I don't know, maybe some chapstick or your ID in these pockets. They just, when I go to put my phone in it, which is usually when I'm running out the door or if I'm going somewhere, so I'm grabbing my phone, I just want to place it in the pocket, it doesn't fit. Like, it will sit in there, but it's likely to fall out. So what I think I would do is just modify these pockets to make them a little bit deeper so that I can securely fit my phone in there without the worry that it's going to fall out, because I do quite like these patch pockets. Or alternatively, I would put inseam pockets in, but because this is such a close to the skin skirt, it's got a slight A-line to it. When you're putting those inseam pockets in, and if you put something in there, you're going to see that, and it's just not going to look as flattering as a patch pocket would. Those are my adjustments. If you've made this pattern, let me know what your thoughts are on it. Or if you've made any other patterns by Nina Lee, I would love to hear what some of your favorites are, because I really like the overall construction and pattern drafting of it. And this was the first pattern that I have tried from her, and I would love to add some more to my collection. So do let me know in the comments down below what some of your favorite tried and true patterns from her are. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing. Until next time, makers, let's get our sewspiration on.